Terrence Shannon Jr. was recently found not guilty in a case that was really limiting his draft stock, going from initially a player right outside the lottery all the way down to the middle of the second round. We're talking about now that verdict is out on Terrence Shannon Jr., he can focus on basketball. Will he disrupt kind of the current mock drafts, and could he go higher than many people are expecting, both the positives and negatives of the Bulls potentially being interested in Terrence Shannon Jr.? We're also going to look at a Bleacher Report article that listed players that the Bulls could look to trade for on draft day. We'll look at the positives and negatives of those players as well. And lastly, we're going to take a look at Mo Cheeks leaving to go to New York to join Tom Thibodeau. We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. So right off the top, Terrence Shannon Jr. last night got a not guilty verdict, and we're not going to get into that case. We're focusing on the basketball aspect here. But this was something that was hanging over the head of Terrence Shannon Jr. that really caused him to go from being initially looked at as maybe even as high as a lottery pick all the way down to the middle of the second round. And if a team would have drafted him in the second round, they would have got amazing value out of it because Terrence Shannon Jr. is good at the game of basketball. But now the question remains, with Terrence Shannon Jr., now this case being behind him and it being one of the biggest things that people were really looking at, and some teams were holding against him, that fear as far as drafting him early, could this be another disruption at more towards the first round of this draft? We already had one in Nikola Topic, who was discovered to have a partially torn ACL that could drop his stock a little bit, right? His teams may look to go with somebody who's not coming into the NBA with any type of ACL injuries. But now with Terrence Shannon Jr. having this case behind him, could he move back into the top of the draft? And I do think he could. Now, with this draft, we've already heard players like Zach Edey, because of the weakness of the draft, have definitely risen up, as well as his production in college. And when you look at Terrence Shannon Jr., he's a player that simply got better every single year in college basketball. He initially started off with Texas Tech. His first 3 years in college basketball, he averaged 9.8 points per game, 12.9, and then that went down to 10.4 in that third year. The last 2 years in college basketball, he averaged 17.2 points per game and 23 points per game last season, those last 2 seasons with the University of Illinois. When you look at it as well, his field goal percentage, he's up the number of shots that he's taken, and that field goal efficiency has basically stayed about the same. His freshman year, he shot the ball 47%, but he was only taking 6.9 shots per game. That increased every year, basically, leading up to his senior year, in which he took 14 shots per game and hit it at a 47% clip. This guy can outright score the basketball. Also, three-point shooting got better every year as far as volume and percentage-wise. Last year, taking 6.5 three-pointers per game, hitting that at a 36% clip. Solid enough. Free throw, 80%. We know he can do that, as well as he's also a solid rebounder at a guard/wing. I think kind of his more promising position at the NBA level is probably going to be the 3, but he could play the 2 as well, and average 4 rebounds per game, 2 assists, right under a block per game, and over a steal per game as well. And that steal per game is kind of one of the things that I want to focus on. Terrence Shannon Jr. by no stretch would ever be called a lockdown defender. But with a lot of what we're seeing from a lot of these young guys, especially in this draft, they are extremely tough off-ball defenders, and that is where he shines at. He plays amazing off-ball defense, and as well as weak side defense, which is when you look at Kobe White and how he started getting better defensively, those are kind of the first things that he started doing as well. He's a cutter. He moves without the ball. He finishes at the rim. He's starting to get his three-point percentage better, which was one of the knocks on his game. Also, he does use his athleticism to be a solid enough defender. He gets chased down blocks. He gets rebounds. He gets those timing plays. He's somebody who gives effort defensively. And while not looked at as a not a lockdown defender, he is somebody who gives effort defensively and is locked in. Terrence Shannon Jr. is the type of player that I absolutely see rising up, especially as he use these last 2 weeks before the draft to maybe go get some private workouts in with teams and things like that. Now that he can focus on basketball, I would not be surprised if you see Terrence Shannon Jr. on draft night be drafted probably in the top 20. And that may even be, lowballing him some a little bit. The question is, does he fit for the Bulls? And that question is kind of twofold, because if the Bulls are moving on, let's say that they are, which I don't think that they are necessarily moving to go younger. I do think either Zach or DeMar will be gone, but let's just say in the world, Zach's gone, DeMar's gone, Terrence Shannon Jr. would be the perfect pick to pair next to Kobe, Ayo, and you have Terrence Shannon Jr. as kind of, we know Kobe can score, but he is playing point guard. Ayo has shown ability to score now as well, especially out in transition. If you have, it's a little small, right? He doesn't have the wingspan profile that AK likes. He's basically 6'6", with almost a 6'7" wingspan. But I do like, even if you're looking at Terrence Shannon Jr. being your scorer off the bench, whatever, Terrence Shannon Jr. is the type of player that I look at and I say, at bare minimum, he's going to score at the next level and be active. He's going to be a 8 to 10 man role player at the very minimum, and he definitely projects to be a starter, especially if you can develop and round out more things in his game. Some knocks against him. Way older than most prospects in this draft. Almost 24 years old. He'll be 24 years old. That's 2 years older than Patrick Williams, all of his rookie year. So if you're going high upside, Terrence Shannon Jr. may not be the pick there, right? But if the Bulls do acquire another pick or something like that, maybe. But the age aspect, and just because of the wingspan, and it kind of doesn't fit what we need, even if the Bulls do go wing, you kind of have wings in this draft that kind of fit more naturally next to Kobe and Ayo. So as much as I would love Terrence Shannon Jr., and I know a lot of Bulls fans would love TSJ to be a Chicago Bull, and I'm with you guys on that. I would love TSJ to be a Chicago Bull. I got to be honest. I don't see it happening. And this is somewhere where me and Pat actually disagree with over on Locked On Bulls. But, I would love Terrence Shannon Jr. to be a Bull. And when he was in the second round, I absolutely viewed him as a player that, sticker, why the hell was the sticker on there? Take the stickers off your hats, people. But with that said, Terrence Shannon Jr. is absolutely the type of player that I would love the Bulls, if they had a later first-round pick or acquired a second-round pick and he fell there, I would have loved for him to fall to the Chicago Bulls. But I can't be a homer in this. In reality, I just don't know if I see the Bulls drafting him. But if they did, I wouldn't be mad at it. I just think that with where the Bulls are, not having a pick guaranteed next season, they may want to go more upside, but I could be completely off on that. That's not something I'd be willing to bet the farm on. I wish I had a farm. So there it comes down to, but I wanted to spend some time talking about Terrence Shannon Jr. and how this could change some things. And honestly, if a team kind of in towards the top of that lottery that maybe kind of wants a more win now prospect, right? We've talked about like the Houston Rockets. I think at number 3, that's a little bit too high. But some of these teams that are looking for a player that can come in and contribute right away, but draft a little bit higher, he could be somebody. The Memphis Grizzlies at number 9 could definitely take a look at him, right? Somebody who can come in right away. The Utah Jazz maybe could be somebody that could take a look at him, maybe even the Oklahoma City Thunder. So we'll see what happens there. But Terrence Shannon Jr. is a player that I do think is going to have a little disruption in the first round of that lottery. I would not be surprised at all to hear his name taken in the first top 20 picks. But you guys can let me know what you guys think on that down below. Now, with that said, moving into the next topic is that a lot of the kind of speculation around the Bulls this offseason, naturally after AK's press conference and him talking about, moving or making change, right? He talked a lot about that. It's led a lot of people to ask, and the focus is, well, who could the Bulls acquire? What trades could they be looking at? Well, Bleacher Report put together a list of players that are going to be available or could be available on draft night to be trade targets, and that the Bulls could be interested. The number 1 player that they had on this list was Dorian Finney-Smith. Now, Dorian Finney-Smith is a player that has been really productive when he's played next to players like Jalen Brunson, Luka Doncic, right? When you have kind of that big-time player, he plays extremely well when he's next to superstars. That's not necessarily what we have here in Chicago or what we're looking to do. But when you look at him, 6'7", 200 pounds, he comes in, he plays power forward primarily, 8 points per game last season, 4 rebounds, 42% shooting. He did shoot the ball 34%, basically 35% from three-point range, taking 4.9 three-pointers per game. Overall, he's a player that I wouldn't mind acquiring, but it depends on where the team is going, right? If the Bulls are keeping, for example, DeMar DeRozan or Zach LaVine, and they're keeping most of this together, you acquire Dorian Finney-Smith, he can definitely help you off the bench. But then you got to look at the contract. $14.9 million is not going to be easy for the Bulls to match without giving up one of their better players, which if they're going to do, you think that they would move in a deal that's kind of better for that. Now, if the Bulls are looking maybe to move on from Zach LaVine and they send Zach LaVine, to Brooklyn, maybe you get something back like that. He also has a player option in 2025-26. Dorian Finney-Smith isn't a bad player, right? I want to be clear there. He's not that at all, but he's a player that, to me, that's the type of move that you make when you're a playoff team and you're trying to fill out your bench or get role players around your star level players. And I just don't know if that's kind of where the Bulls are kind of focusing their acquisitions on, especially with $15 million. But maybe I could be wrong on that. The next player that they have up on this list is Brandon Ingram. We've already talked heavily about Brandon Ingram. Because of the pending contract situation, because of the New Orleans Pelicans maybe looking to change some things, could they look to move on from Brandon Ingram, who's had to play shooting guard for this team a lot of his minutes? It's a possibility, right? Thing with Brandon Ingram, he can outright score the ball. Didn't really turn out to be the defender that some people thought he was going to turn out to be, which is cool. He still is a player that does he gives effort defensively, right? You also got to look at the fact that Brandon Ingram is also somebody who his contract is off the books at the end of next season. So if you do make the move for Brandon Ingram, it may not be for him to be on your roster long term. It may be, hey, we can get this money off the books sooner. It's probably potentially would be in a Zach LaVine type trade. But then again, I just don't see it being Zach LaVine straight up for Brandon Ingram. The Bulls would probably have to give up some considerable assets in a deal like that. I just don't know if they're in that position necessarily. A $36 million contract, like I said, next year, but he's an unrestricted free agent in next summer. So again, you can renegotiate if he does work out for you. But Brandon Ingram, the biggest thing with him is the injury concerns. You look over it. Since 2020, he's had one season of playing over 61 games in the NBA. He played 61 in 2020-21, and then he played 64 games this past season. But other than that, it's been 55, 45. He hasn't played 70 games or more since his rookie year in the league. So that brings tons of questions around Brandon Ingram and his stability there. And for a team that's already had some PTSD as far as injury concerns. But again, if you're acquiring him more so, the focus being to get off money and get off his money at the end of next year, then all that's neither here nor there, right? And if he does end up showing something for you, maybe you hope that you can get a reasonable contract extension in line for him. So that's kind of what you want to look at for. He is somebody that can score. He can get averaging over 5 rebounds, over 5 assists. Brandon Ingram can contribute to winning. And one thing I hate that when people do, and a lot of you guys do this, and I've done it at times too, is that when we look at things and we then go to, oh, well, they sucked in this playoff series. Yeah, but what about the 82 games before you get to the playoffs? Like, I get it. If you're a team that's making moves to be a championship contender, you absolutely look at playoff performance. But I hate to tell you guys this. The Bulls are just trying to be a team that can even get out the first round of the playoffs. So when you try to knock a player just because of what they did or did not do in the playoffs, it's like, hey, but yeah, there's a whole season that happens before that. And the Bulls are trying to win games during that season. And Brandon Ingram is a player that basically since 2019-20, he's averaged over 20 points per game. He can outright score the ball. He's done it fairly efficiently. He hit way more threes than, for example, like what we get from certain players in this roster now. He is somebody that can help, but he's not somebody that you look to build your team around in the future at any point, which people thought of. Now, still only 26 years old, right? That's the thing as well. He's been in the league since 2016, only 26 years old. So, still could he fit a timeline in a way? Possibly. But at being 26, meaning that he'll be 27 when he hits unrestricted free agency, he'll probably be looking for a lot of long-term security in that place. And I'm not necessarily saying a move for Brandon Ingram would be one that you're looking for the long-term implications of that. It could be that they're just looking at the right now, the current, and getting off that money. But you guys can let me know what you think on that down below as always. And then lastly on this list for the Bulls, they had DeJounte Murray listed as somebody that the Chicago Bulls could take a look at that could be available. And here's the thing. We've gotten voicemails on it. A lot of people have brought up DeJounte Murray. Yes, the Atlanta Hawks could be looking to move on from either him or Trae Young, or maybe even both. You just never know what the Atlanta Hawks are going to do. But we've heard already that the Bulls called their best trade chip, well, their biggest contract, probably their best trade chip is Alex Caruso. But they already made that call to try to see if they can get DeJounte Murray, and the Atlanta Hawks said no. Now, DeJounte Murray, maybe with having the number 1 overall pick, maybe they're willing to sell a little bit lower. We've seen that happen before as well from teams. Historically, if they have the number 1 overall pick, some players that they were looking to move, maybe they're willing to take a little bit less. I just don't think that the Bulls would be willing to give up probably the future draft capital that the Atlanta Hawks would want for DeJounte Murray. And DeJounte, for what it's worth, I do see he could fit in on this team. 22.5 points per game last season. Did that on 46% shooting. He took 7 threes per game. Hit that at a 36% clip, which is solid, right? 5 rebounds per game, 6 assists per game, sharing that backcourt with Trae Young, which we know he also averaged almost a steal and a half per game as well. This is a guy who we know what DeJounte Murray is. We know what he could be, and he's a guy that I would never be mad at the Bulls acquiring. I have some questions about Kobe White and DeJounte Murray fit because they already tried that with Trae Young and DeJounte, but maybe Kobe White is more apt at playing off the ball than what a Trae Young was. I kind of like Kobe White playing on ball, but maybe the Bulls want to see something different with that. It's just that question when it comes to DeJounte Murray. And overall, I think that if the Hawks made DeJounte Murray available, regardless of if they were willing to sell low or not, I just think they're going to get a lot better offers than what I can see the Chicago Bulls realistically putting together. But let's say the Hawks they look at Alex Caruso and they say, no, this is a guy who can play next to Trae Young. We're going to be bringing Alexander Sarr in or Risha Sher in, and we think that Alex Caruso could fit next to that. We're willing to kind of work out a deal. You still got money you need to match on that, right? You still got that part of it, and that's where it gets a little tricky for the Chicago Bulls, right? Yeah, in a vacuum, just saying, hey, the Chicago Bulls trading for DeJounte Murray. Okay, yeah, I could see that. But you still got, on top of that, you got $25 million. Alex Caruso's deal is $9 million. So you still got another $15 million basically that you got to match with that salary. And DeJounte, for the credit, he's locked into 2027-28. So if you are making a trade for DeJounte Murray, you better have a plan for him to be part of your long-term future, because he's not going to come off the books at earliest until then. He has a player option. More than likely, he's going to pick that up. So you're looking at the 2028-29 season when DeJounte Murray becomes a free agent again. So that's what it comes down to, right? And again, not to knock the player, I just don't know if the Bulls have the assets to try to acquire such a player. But maybe I could be a little bit wrong on that. I guess ultimately we'll see. I just don't have high hopes of the Bulls making that type of move, but maybe they surprise us. But let me know, what do you guys think about these 3 trade targets from Bleacher Report? Dorian Finney-Smith, Brandon Ingram, DeJounte Murray. There was also a separate article, it wasn't on Bleacher Report, but they did say that D'Angelo Russell would be available, and they did list the Bulls as somebody who could be interested in that. I always have been up and down on the D'Angelo Russell aspect of things. Before kind of Io made his ascension, I kind of saw it. Now, I think if we're acquiring D'Angelo Russell, that probably means a Zach LaVine to the Los Angeles Lakers trade, which if he's willing to accept a bench role, maybe. But you guys can let me know what you think on that. Maybe I'm tripping a little bit, which I've been known to do from time to time. With that said, let's get into the last topic for today, and that is Mo Cheeks, who initially left Billy Donovan's coaching staff reportedly because he wanted to accept a position that didn't take as much travel, that he was going to take kind of a more behind-the-scenes role than be on the bench, but wanted to stay with Billy Donovan. Keep in mind, this has been Billy Donovan's head assistant since the OKC Thunder days, right? And so he ended up stepping down from that. We came in, we got Dan Craig. We got some really good assistants coming in here that are going to help the Chicago Bulls. But ultimately, you got to ask yourself this, is that Mo Cheeks now leaving and deciding to go to the New York Knicks to join Tom Thibodeau's team. To me, great. Like, go join a team that, again, like I said, and I know it triggers a lot of hell, it triggers me because I don't like the New York Knicks. Everybody knows it's like I like a lot of their roster. I will say that. I'm not going to act like I don't like a lot of their roster because I actually do. I like their roster, but I hate the franchise of the New York Knicks just because I hate the Knicks. It's ingrained in who I am as a person to hate the New York Knicks. That's just is what it is. So it comes down to that. But outside of that, he's joining a staff that very much so is on an upwards trajectory where the Bulls aren't. And he could come in, and his calming kind of nature, him being the voice, could really pair well with Tom Thibodeau and kind of how he's the more loud guy and things like that. So, them going out and getting Mo Cheeks, it kind of makes sense. I like the fit there, but it could mean that the coaches that left, Chris Fleming, who's always been talked about amongst other NBA GMs as one of the coaches that a lot of GMs thinks will eventually make a great head coach. Is he somebody now that will have our teams leaving the Chicago Bulls because they just want to get off the sinking ship? Whether it be they don't trust Billy Donovan, or is it because they they just don't want to be attached to a team that they just don't think are gonna be able to turn this around, right? That's a big thing in that. And I think ultimately when you look at, yeah, we got Dan Craig, we got Wes Unseld Jr., we got coaches in here that bring a lot of, history to this team, and you don't want to take away from that. But ultimately, when you have coaches that have been here and that basically just say, "Hey, I'm out. Like I'm out. Like I got other things. Like I want to go other places." Especially Mo Cheeks initially saying, "Hey, yeah, I'm gonna stay here. I'm just gonna take a role behind the scenes." And not to say that Mo Cheeks has done a whole hell of a lot, right? I think Ayo Dosunmu and Kobe White have really been the last players to really talk about Mo Cheeks helping their development. This was kind of the first years that this coaching staff came in here, and Ayo Dosunmu's rookie year. But ultimately, I think that it speaks to, and this is my personal opinion, not me reporting on anything that I've heard, but my personal opinion is that maybe the assistant coaches didn't have the biggest voices here, and they want to go places to where they feel their voices are going to be heard. Now, there's also a flip side to look at it as, well, maybe AK came in and said, listen, because we're not firing Billy, we're going to pick your new assistants, and we're bringing in two guys, one guy that I have a lot of history with, who actually was coaching in Denver, and another guy who comes from the Miami Heat tree, and they wanted to add some guys who brought some things that they clearly saw their head coach that they're not moving on from, and Billy Donovan was lacking. But I think that it does point to, whether you look at how players look at Billy Donovan or whatever, I think that the assistant coaches wanted new opportunities, and that's perfectly fine. And we probably needed some new voices here as well, and that could ultimately end up helping the Chicago Bulls in the long run. But I think that just how this all kind of points to, maybe, just maybe, people don't necessarily. And we heard yesterday, right, that the Bulls ranked lowest on desirable head coaching jobs. So, there you go. When you put all of it together, it may point to a little turmoil around the Chicago Bulls. But unfortunately, that's nothing we're not used to. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullsCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.